It was a quiet evening in a small-town cafe, a place known for its warmth, laughter, and soft music. In one corner stood an old upright piano, its paint chipped and its keys worn out from years of use. A few of the keys no longer worked properly, and whenever someone tried to play, the sound came out uneven like a melody that had lost its way. Still, that piano was loved. It carried stories, memories, and the voices of all who dared to touch it. That night, the cafe was busy. The smell of coffee filled the air, and people chatted while waiting for the next person to perform. It was a little tradition. Anyone could walk up to the piano and play a song. Most people played safe, cheerful tunes, something to entertain the crowd. Laughter mixed with music, and the place felt alive. Among the crowd sat a young woman at the back, quiet and unnoticed. She wore a simple outfit, nothing fancy, and looked like she had come straight from work. Her hands looked tired, but her eyes carried a calm spark, the kind that belongs to someone who loves something deeply. She looked at the piano not as a piece of furniture, but as if it was something alive, something calling her. When her turn finally came, she walked to the front slowly. The room wasn't paying much attention. A few people were still talking while others scrolled through their phones. But the moment she sat down, the small creak of the stool caught some eyes. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then she pressed the first note. The sound was rough. One of the keys didn't work properly and made a dull thud instead of music. A few people chuckled. She tried again, but another key stuck halfway. The melody broke apart. From a corner table, a man in a sharp suit laughed louder than anyone else. He was a local musician, well known around the cafe for his talent. He loved attention, and when he saw someone struggling, he couldn't resist showing off his confidence. "Maybe that piano's too broken for beginners," he said with a smirk. His friends laughed along, trying to impress him. The woman didn't reply. She simply smiled politely, her fingers still resting on the keys. She pressed a few more notes, slower this time, listening carefully to the sound each key made, both the working ones and the broken ones. It was as if she was studying the instrument, learning its pain and its limits, but when another key failed to play, the laughter grew louder. The man in the suit leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms proudly. "Told you," he said to the others. "You need skill to handle real music." For a brief moment, it seemed like she might give up. She lifted her hands, looked at the piano, and sighed softly. The cafe went quiet for a second, waiting to see what she would do. Then, without saying a word, she stood up and quietly walked away from the piano. A few people whispered. Some felt sorry for her, others shrugged and went back to their drinks. The man in the suit took the chance to stand up and sit at the piano himself. He cracked his knuckles dramatically, showing off. Then he played a lively tune, something fast and flashy. The crowd clapped along, happy to be entertained again. But the woman didn't leave the cafe. She sat at a corner table, listening closely. Her eyes never left the piano. Every time the man played, she noticed how the broken keys sounded, where they failed, how they echoed. It was as if she was memorizing the map of that piano in her mind. When he finished, the cafe erupted in applause. He stood, bowed slightly, and smiled proudly. People praised his performance, and he accepted every word with confidence. The woman clapped too, quietly but sincerely. No one noticed her anymore. The show was over and the night moved on. Later, when most people had left, the woman went back to the piano. The lights were dim, and only a few customers remained. She sat down again and gently pressed a few keys. The same broken sounds came, but this time she smiled. She had learned something. The piano wasn't her enemy. It was simply wounded. And she understood how to make it sing again. Over the next few days, she kept coming to the cafe. She didn't perform for the crowd. She practiced when the place was quiet. Sometimes the owner saw her and offered a small smile. She never made a scene or asked for attention. She just played softly, teaching herself to dance around the broken notes, finding beauty in the flaws. Meanwhile, the man in the suit kept his routine. He performed almost every evening, enjoying the cheers and compliments. To him, the piano was just an instrument, a way to show how skilled he was. To her, it had become something much deeper, a way to express herself without words. One night, the cafe was even busier than usual. The man was scheduled to perform again, and everyone came to watch. The woman sat quietly near the back as always. The man noticed her and smirked, remembering how she had struggled. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said enough. He played his usual songs, smooth, confident, and perfect. The audience clapped, but their faces were the same as always, polite smiles, brief applause, and then back to talking. His music was good, but it didn't touch hearts anymore. It sounded the same every time. After his set, the owner looked around for someone else to play. The woman's eyes met his for a moment, and he gave her a small nod. She hesitated, but then stood up slowly. The room noticed. Whispers started. "Isn't that the one who couldn't play last time?" She didn't reply. She walked toward the piano, her steps calm but steady. The man in the suit leaned back again, half amused. He whispered to his friends, "Let's see what happens this time." The cafe grew quiet. Everyone waited, expecting another awkward moment or broken melody. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys once more. Her fingers rested exactly where the broken ones were, but instead of avoiding them, she embraced them. And then she began to play. At first, the tune was soft, almost hesitant, but within seconds it grew into something beautiful, a melody that wrapped the room in silence. She moved her fingers gracefully, playing around the broken keys in a way no one had seen before. Each missing note became part of the rhythm, like she had turned the flaws into features. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was alive, emotional, full of heart. People stopped talking. Even the waiters froze mid-step. The man who had laughed at her before sat up straight, eyes wide. He couldn't understand how she was creating something so rich from a piano that was half broken. Her music filled the cafe like sunlight through cracked glass, imperfect but breathtaking. Every note carried a story. Every pause carried emotion. The laughter from before was replaced by silence and awe. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not the usual polite applause, but a heartfelt one. The man who had mocked her stood up. For the first time, he didn't smile. Instead, he bowed his head slightly in respect. And in that small moment, everyone understood. Perfection doesn't come from flawless things, but from those who can make beauty out of brokenness. The woman smiled, stood up from the piano, and quietly walked away, leaving behind a melody no one would ever forget. The next evening, the cafe was more crowded than ever. People had started talking about the mysterious woman who played the broken piano like it was alive. No one knew her name, but everyone who had been there last night kept repeating how her music had touched their hearts. Some said it felt like the piano cried and healed at the same time. Others said they couldn't sleep after hearing it because it still played in their minds. The man in the suit came earlier that day. He was known for being confident, sometimes even proud, but this time something in his eyes looked different. He had been thinking about that woman all night. Her music had disturbed his thoughts in a way he didn't expect. He had always believed that talent was about perfection, clean notes, sharp timing, flawless rhythm. But what she did had no perfection, yet it carried something deeper. When the owner of the cafe saw him, he smiled. "You're early today," he said. The man just nodded, pretending it was nothing, but his mind was elsewhere. He sat near the piano and ran his fingers on the keys. The same broken ones responded with dull thuds, reminding him of how she made them sound beautiful. He tried to play a few notes like she did, but it didn't feel the same. It sounded empty. By evening, people started coming in. The woman arrived quietly again, wearing the same simple clothes, carrying that same calm look. She didn't come for attention. She just came because she loved to play. When she walked in, a few people recognized her and whispered to each other, their faces lighting up with curiosity. The man in the suit watched her from across the room. For a second, their eyes met. She gave him a soft, polite smile, not angry, not proud, just kind. That single moment made him realize how much smaller his laughter from that night had been. The cafe owner came up and said gently, Would you like to play tonight again? She nodded, but before she could walk to the piano, the man stood up and said, Wait, I'd like to play first. Everyone looked at him. He was one of the cafe's favorites, and people clapped lightly, thinking he was going to show his usual performance. He sat down, adjusted his sleeves, and started to play a classical piece, fast, strong, and full of technique. His fingers moved quickly, perfectly in control. The sound filled the room, but something was missing. Even though the tune was flawless, it didn't touch anyone's heart. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel alive. When he finished, there was applause, but not as strong as before. People had heard something more powerful the night before, and now they knew the difference. The man noticed it too. He smiled awkwardly and stood up. Then he looked at the woman and said softly, Now it's your turn. She nodded and took his place. There was no tension in her face, only peace. She placed her hands gently on the piano, took a deep breath, and began. This time the melody was different. It started slow like a whisper. Each note seemed to float in the air, delicate and full of feeling. She played around the broken keys again, but now she turned them into part of the story she was telling through music. The dull thud of a broken key became like a heartbeat. The soft notes around it became the voice of emotion. It was as if the piano was speaking, not through perfection but through truth. The audience fell completely silent. The clinking of cups stopped. Even the waiters froze in their steps. People leaned forward, trying to catch every sound. Her hands moved gracefully, her body slightly swaying with the rhythm. Her eyes closed as if she was somewhere far away, lost in her own world. The man who had laughed at her before sat in the front row now, watching her in awe. He couldn't believe how effortlessly she made that broken piano sound like it belonged on a grand stage. Her music didn't ask for attention. It simply demanded to be felt. As the melody rose higher, emotions filled the room. Some people had tears in their eyes, others smiled softly. The song carried a story, of struggle, of pain, of finding beauty even when life feels broken. Every sound was like a message, that even damaged things can create something unforgettable if handled with love. The final note hung in the air like a feather. Then silence, a silence so deep that it felt like the whole cafe was holding its breath. And when that note finally faded, the applause began. Slow at first, then louder and louder until everyone stood up. The man in the suit didn't clap at first. He stood quietly looking at her, realizing how wrong he had been. Then slowly he walked toward her and did something no one expected. He bowed, deeply, with real respect. The crowd went silent again, watching this moment. She looked surprised, then smiled softly. You don't need to do that, she said quietly. The piano just needed someone to listen to it differently. He looked at her and replied, No, I needed to listen differently. Everyone in the cafe felt something shift in that moment. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about understanding, about how easy it is to laugh at someone's effort without knowing their story, and how powerful it can be when we see true passion instead of judging mistakes. From that day on, the woman became a quiet legend in that little cafe. She never called herself a musician. She just said she loved making music from what others had given up on. And every time she played, the crowd grew a little larger. Not because they wanted entertainment, but because they wanted to feel something real. The man stopped calling himself the cafe's best musician. Instead, he became one of her biggest supporters. Sometimes they played together side by side. Two people who had once been strangers now connected through something unspoken. When she played, he listened with full attention, learning from the way she shaped beauty out of imperfection. One rainy evening, she came in to find the piano had finally been repaired. The broken keys had been replaced with new ones, and it looked clean and polished again. The owner proudly told her, Now it's perfect. You can play even better. But when she sat down and pressed the keys, she smiled faintly. The sound was clean, too clean. She missed the old broken notes. They had taught her to listen carefully, to find rhythm in flaws, to make emotion out of silence. She played a soft melody anyway. But there was something in her heart that knew the piano's scars had once made her stronger. That night, when she finished, the man in the suit said quietly, Funny how we thought fixing it would make it better. She looked at him and nodded. Sometimes, she said, the broken version tells a more beautiful story. Her words stayed with him for a long time. From then on, people in that cafe never looked at broken things the same way again. Whether it was a cracked cup, a chipped table, or an old piano, they remembered how that woman turned imperfection into music. She eventually stopped coming as often, but her name, or rather her story, stayed alive. People still told new visitors about the girl who made everyone bow in respect with her melody. They said her music wasn't about showing off skill. It was about showing heart, and whenever someone new sat down to play that piano, they would always pause for a moment, press one of the still slightly uneven keys, and smile, remembering her. Because she had taught them something simple but unforgettable, that real beauty doesn't come from what's perfect. It comes from what's honest. Even years later, the man in the suit still performed there. He never mocked anyone again. Instead, he encouraged every newcomer, telling them, "Don't worry about mistakes. Just play with your heart. That's what truly matters." And in that little cafe, under the soft glow of the lights and the sound of coffee cups, the story of the woman who played the broken piano continued to live, not just in sound, but in the hearts of everyone who had ever heard her melody.